Oh man, I'm ready for war. Look, I'm going to be talking about stereotypes and how they affect the attitudes toward black people today in this episode of Big Dog Tactical. You feel me? Welcome back to Big Dog Tactical. This is a show that talks about different topics from firearms to self-defense, having a big dog warrior mindset, tactical equipment, personal growth, mentoring, and so much more. You feel me? The mission of this channel is to inspire thought that reaches past the stereotypes that plague American society. And with each episode, we are trying to ignite a passion for gaining understanding by questioning, learning, and making informed decisions. I promote gun ownership and spreading community knowledge to collectively increase and promote gun safety. You feel me? However, we specifically target the minority community, although we welcome input from all walks of life. No matter where you come from, you are welcome here. Do you understand what I'm saying? Of course you do. Now listen, I'm doing commentary in this episode. And right now, I'm going to be talking about negative racial stereotypes and their effects on attitudes toward African American people. Now listen, people hate when you talk about race in America. Race is always the elephant in the room. People refuse to understand how it affects people and how people are treated. You know what I'm saying? But it's all good. Listen, as human beings, we naturally evaluate everything when we come in contact with it. We try to gain insight and direction from our evaluations of other people. When we do this, sometimes we create stereotypes. So you might ask yourself, what is a stereotype? Stereotypes, for this video, I'm going to define it as, I'm going to be technical, as cognitive structures that contain a perceiver's knowledge, beliefs, and expectations about a certain group of people. Oh man, I feel like that was a good one. I think somebody should just give me a hug or something, high five or something. I think I broke it down, you know. Look, these cognitive constructs are often created. What's up? Well, anyway, these constructs, they are created a lot of times out of a small amount of truth. And then that small amount of truth is distorted beyond reality. Racial stereotypes are constructed beliefs that all members of the same race share given characteristics. These attributed characteristics are usually negative. You feel me? So I'm going to talk about historical racial stereotypes of African Americans, and you will learn that many of these distorted images still exist in the society that we live in right now. In naming this video, I described a problem. Now, I did this because I noticed that in this generation, everyone is like a big clown. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but I noticed this. You know what I'm saying? Everybody's clowning around. Everybody think it's a joke. Everybody want to just do too much. You got me? But moving on. I want you to understand that racial stereotypes of early American history had a significant role in shaping attitudes toward African American people during that time and harm us right now. Images of the Sambo, Jim Crow, the Savage, Mammy, Aunt Jemima, Sapphire, and Jezebel, these are images that are still alive. But guess what? You may not know about it. And if you black, you might not even be thinking about it. You feel me? So what I'm getting ready to do is I'm going to talk about the imagery. First, let me talk about the Sambo. Sambo is one of the most enduring stereotypes in American history. The Sambo is a pervasive image of a simple-minded, docile black man, and this image dates back to the colonization of the Americas. The Sambo stereotype flourished during the reign of slavery within the United States. This Sambo caricature was written about, and he was described as a happy slave. White slave owners molded African American males as a whole into this image of a jolly, overgrown child who is happy to serve his master. However, the Sambo was seen as naturally lazy and therefore reliant upon his master for direction. Now, in this way, the institution of slavery was justified. Look, if you read Bishop Whipple's Southern Diary, you can see that this is used as evidence for a justification of slavery. This book, it quotes him as saying this. He says, "They seem a happy race of beings. And if you did not know it, you would never imagine that they were slaves." However, it was not only slave owners who adopted the Sambo stereotype. Although Sambo, he was born out of a defense for slavery, it extended far beyond these bounds. It's essentially to realize the vast scope. It's very essential to understand this scope of this stereotype, because it was transmitted through music titles, through the lyrics of music, through folk sayings. It was put in literature. Sambo was put in children's stories, games, postcards, restaurant names, menus, and thousands of artifacts validate what I'm saying. White women, men, children, all across the United States embraced the image of a fat, wide-eyed, grinning black man. It was perpetuated over and over again because what it had to do is that it had to shape the mind of people. And this shaping endured an attitude toward African American people for hundreds of years. In fact, a stereotype may be so consistently and authoritatively transmitted in each generation from parent to child that it seems almost like it's a biological fact. This is one of the reasons you see so many people on YouTube right now and all they do is clown. Every single video, they're all clowns. And they looking like the worst version of themselves. They clown so much that you could never take them serious. Even if it's an act. You just see them as the biggest clowns. This has been implanted into the brain of my people to be giant clowns. You know what I often call this right here? The GCE. And that stands for Giant Clown Era. Because it seems like we in an era of time where everybody is clowning. If you notice that so many people in this era are doing so much clowning around, then this is what I want you to do. Leave me an example in the comments. Hey, maybe even link the video because I'll look at it. Now look, this is not a condemnation of people who tell jokes, but I just noticed everyone is preparing for a war. But you focused on being a clown. You got to man up and get your weight up. You understand what I'm saying? And start taking over the world. Because what's happening in this world is serious, whether you think so or not. You feel me? Let me talk about Jim Crow. The stereotyping of African Americans was brought to the theatrical stage with the invention of what was called the blackface minstrel. That's right. Early 19th century, white performers, they would darken their faces with burnt cork, and they would paint grotesquely exaggerated white mouths all over their face, and then they would put on a woolly black wig and then take to the stage and entertain society. You feel me? The character that they created was called Jim Crow. This person was called a city dandy because he or she was the northern counterpart to the southern plantation darky called the Sambo. That's right. A performer by the name of T.D. Rice is the acknowledged creator or originator of the American blackface minstrel, Jim Crow. His inspiration for the famous minstrel dance and comedy routine was an old, crippled black man dressed in rags. He saw this man dancing in the streets. And during that time, a law prohibited African Americans from dancing because it was said to be crossing your feet against the Lord. Now, as an accommodation to this law, African Americans developed a shuffling dance in which their feet never left the ground. So they didn't cross their leg because that was against the law. And back then, you know what would happen if you broke the law. You got what I'm saying? But listen, this physically impaired man, Rice saw dancing in this way, and it became the prototype for early minstrel shows. Sorry, this is like a history lesson. In 1830, when Rice performed this street dance, this effect went viral. Yeah. White actors throughout the North began performing the Jim Crow to enormous crowds. Back then, this was like the definition of going viral. You know what I'm saying? And this popularity continued. And at the height of the minstrel era, the decades preceding and following the Civil War, there were at least 30 full-time blackface minstrel companies performing all across the United States. The black caricature, Jim Crow, became the image of the black man in the mind of the white Western world. This image, though, was even more powerful in the North and in the West because many people had never come across or came in contact with a person who was African American. It had been argued that the image of the minstrel clown has been the most persistent and influential image in blacks in American history. That's right. The most influential image of blacks in American history is a clown minstrel. Wow. It's just crazy. When I think about these stereotypes and how they have been transmitted to African American society, it makes me shake my head. But do me a favor. Research some Jim Crow songs. And when you see this, whew, you're going to be surprised. You feel me? Look, the method of representing African Americans as shuffling, dancing, wisecracking, high-stepping buffoons evolved over time. And it's crazy how African American actors began to play these parts on stage and in the movies. I want you to do me a favor. Search for a man named Bert Williams. He was a popular African American artist who performed this stereotype for white society. Look at the roles that Hollywood have black people playing. You always looking like a clown. No one can take you serious. And guess what? You can't see that you're hated. You can't see it. It's like you're blind. Let me talk about the savage. Yeah, it's another stereotype of black people. They're just straight savages. Movies were and still are a powerful medium for the transmission of stereotypes. Early silent movies, such as The Wooing and Wedding of a Coon. Yeah, that was released in 1904. Or The Slave, that was released in 1905. Or the Sambo series that was going on and being ran from 1909 to 1911. Or The Nigger. That's right, in 1915. It offered existing stereotypes of African American people, but through theater. But let me talk about something massive. It wasn't until the premiere of a movie called Birth of a Nation, and this happened during the Reconstruction period in 1915. This year, it marked a change in the emphasis of the happy Sambo guy and the pretentious and inept Jim Crow stereotype. And it transitioned African American people from just being Jim Crow and docile and dumb like the Sambo to being the savage. In a D.W. Griffith film, the Ku Klux Klan tames the terrifying, savage African American. How was that done, though? Through lynching. That's right. Lynching was used as a way of controlling African American people. On a side note, you need to understand what lynching really is. It was a public mob controlled hanging. And the purpose of it was to send a message to others of who was in control. You feel me? Following emancipation, the image of the threatening brute from the dark continent that was revitalized. Acts of violence, racial violence, were justified and encouraged through the emphasis on the stereotype of the savage. The urgent message to whites in America was, we must put blacks in their place or else. You feel me? Old things about African Americans began to well up in the face of this perceived threat. Beliefs that blacks were mentally inferior, physically and culturally unevolved, and ape-like in appearance were supported by prominent white figures like Abraham Lincoln, Andrew Johnson, and Thomas Jefferson. You know, Theodore Roosevelt publicly stated, as a race and in the mass, the Negroes are altogether inferior to whites. That's right. You know, the 9th edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, published in 1884, stated authoritatively that the African race occupied the lowest position of the evolutionary scale, thus affording the best material for the comparative study of the highest of anthropoids in the human species. Now, if you don't know what Encyclopedia Britannica is, that was like the Wikipedia of back then. You got what I'm saying? Look, this idea of African Americans as ape-like savages was exceptionally pervasive, and it influenced people even now. But listen, in 1906, the New York Zoological Park featured an exhibit with an African American man and a chimpanzee. Now, several years later, Barnum and Bailey, the Ringling Brothers, they exhibited something called the Monkey Man. It was a black man that was caged with a female chimpanzee that had been trained to wash clothes and hang them on a line. Scientific studies were white scientific studies were conducted to establish the proper place of African Americans in society. Scientists, they conducted tests and measurements and concluded that black people were savages. And I'm going to give you some of the reasons that they were savages. You feel me? You know what? In these conclusions, I'm going to alphabetize it too. A, the abnormal length of black people's arms. B, the weight of their brain. That's right. They said that a Negro's brain was 35 ounces, a gorilla brain was 20 ounces, but the average European brain was 45 ounces. Yeah. See, that short, flat, stub nose that black people had, their thick, protruding lips, exceedingly thick cranium, their short black hair is eccentric, it's elliptical or almost flat in sections and distinctively woolly. And it had a thick epidermis. Craziness, man. In addition to these presumed anatomical differences, African Americans were thought to be far less sensitive to pain than white people. For example, they said black women were thought to experience little pain when they gave birth to a child. Yeah. These stereotypes of the animal-like savage were used to rationalize the harsh treatment of enslaved people during slavery. It was also used to justify and minimize the murder, torture, and oppression of African Americans following emancipation. You know what? I think strongly that it can be argued that this stereotype exists right now. How much do you have to hate a group of people? And why can't you see that this is a war? You're hated. Your woman is hated. And it's like, you can't see. You know, there were 4 stereotypes for female African Americans. She was either the Mammy, Aunt Jemima, Sapphire, or Jezebel. The most enduring of these stereotypes is the Mammy. Now, this stereotype originated in the South, but eventually spread like wildfire. As with Sambo, that Mammy stereotype, it quickly rose as a way to justify slavery. The Mammy, she was a large, independent woman with pitch black skin and shining white teeth. She wore a different type of dress, a drab calico dress. And she wore a headscarf, and she lived to serve her master and mistress. The Mammy understood the value of the white lifestyle. The stereotype suggests that she raised the masses' children and loved them dearly. She loved the masses' children even more than she loved her own children. Her tendency to give advice to her mistress was seen as harmless and humorous. You understand what I'm saying? Although she treated whites with respect, the mammy, she was a tyrant in her own family. She dominated her children and she dominated her husband. That's right. She dominated the Sambo with her temper. The image of the mammy as the controller of the African American male was used as further evidence of his inferiority to whites. You see, Mammy, she was masculine in her looks and her temperament. She was not seen as a sexual being or a threat to white women. This obese matron figure with big chest area and big behind area, she was the antithesis of the European standard of beauty because she was non-threatening to whites. Mamie was considered as American as apple pie. That's right. And this mammy stereotype was presented to the public in literature and in movies. And it's possibly the most outstanding example. You know what? Yeah. I got an outstanding example. The mammy role played by a lady by the name of Hattie McDaniel in a movie or a book called Gone with the Wind. That's right. The book, published in 1936 by Margaret Mitchell, it helped to keep the mythical past of African Americans in the Old South alive. The large number of people whose attitudes were shaped by this portrayal is demonstrated through its phenomenal sales record. The Bible is the only book that rivals Gone with the Wind in total sales. Additionally, the movie version remains one of the biggest box office successes in history. Mitchell's character simultaneously won the hearts of Americans and fixed stereotypes of African Americans in their mind. Let me talk about another stereotype of black women. It was Aunt Jemima. The stereotype of Aunt Jemima, of course, it evolved out of the mammy image. But she differs from mammy in that her duties were restricted to cooking. It was through Aunt Jemima that the association of the African American woman with domestic work, especially cooking, because that thing became fixed in the minds of society. And as a result, hundreds of Aunt Jemima collectibles found their way into American kitchens. I'm talking about grocery list holders, salt and pepper shakers, spoon holders, stovetop sets, flour scoops, flour pots, mixing bowls, teapots, so much more. Aunt Jemima's most famous image is in the pancake advertisement campaign in 1889. A dude named Chris Rutt chose Aunt Jemima as the name for his new self-rising pancake mix because, according to him, it just naturally made him think of good cooking. Obviously, others agreed because the campaign was an instant success. That dude named Rut, he sold his company to, I want to say, Davis Milling Company, which chose Nancy Green as her Aunt Jemima product spokesman. This character developed a loyal following of both black and white people. To these people, Aunt Jemima had become reality. Her face can still be found on pancake boxes to this day. But, of course, her image has been slightly altered. But the stereotype of Aunt Jemima is alive and well. Now, look, I'm going to try to speed this up. So let me talk about Sapphire. Sapphire was a stereotype solidified through a hit show called Amos and Andy. This profoundly popular series began on the radio in 1926, and it developed into a television series. And I think that television series ended in like the 1950s. This cartoon show depicted the Sapphire character as a bossy, headstrong woman who was engaged in an ongoing verbal battle with her husband Kingfish. Sapphire possessed the emotional makeup of the Mammy and Aunt Jemima merged into one. You feel me? Her fierce, independent, and big personality placed her in the role of the matriarch. She dominated her foolish husband by emasculating him with verbal put-downs. This stereotype was immensely humorous to white Americans. Her outrageous hand on a hip, finger-pointing style helped carry the show through 4,000 episodes before it was terminated due to its negative racial content. And finally, Jezebel. The final female stereotype is Jezebel. Jezebel, she was the harlot, aka the hoe. You understand what I'm saying? This image of the bad black girl represented the undeniable sexual side of African American women. The traditional Jezebel was a light-skinned, slender mulatto girl with long, straight hair and small features. She was more, well, I'm going to say that she more closely resembled the European ideal for beauty than any other pre-existing image. Whereas the Mammy and Aunt Jemima and Sapphire were unattractive images, the Jezebel stereotype was immensely attractive to white males. The creation of hypersexual seductress named Jezebel served to absolve white males of the responsibility in the sexual abuse and rape of African American women. That's right. Black women in such cases were said to be asking for it. This was the defense of white males who were raping black people at this point in time. They would say she wanted it, but it was because the movies depicted these black women as whores who wanted it. I will say that, although so much has changed since the days of Sambo, Jim Crow, the Savage, Mammy, Aunt Jemima, Sapphire, and Jezebel, it can be argued convincingly that similar stereotypes of African Americans exist right now. There should be little doubt that the aspects of Sambo live on in the minds of this society and show through the crevices of American culture in different ways. However, the predominant modern stereotypes are the violent, brute African American male and the dominant, lazy African American female. You know, I was just doing research, and the black females were being called welfare mothers. Even on the news. You know, recent research has shown that whites are more likely to hold these stereotypes, especially with respect to issues of crime and welfare. As political and legislative decisions still are controlled by white males, these negative biases are often expressed through policy formation. That's right, the formation of policy. There's a trend in this society, and it's like the trend is in this society is to discriminate against and deny access to social institutions for African American people. You know, I was just reading a study that indicated that whites who hold negative stereotypes of African Americans judge them harshly, or judge them harsher than they do whites when making hypothetical decisions about violent crimes, and even welfare benefits. You know what? I done talked this in the ground. You feel me? I think I done covered all these stereotypes, you know what I mean? To get these people to stop this clowning, man. You know what? Let me give you the big dog bottom line. It's important to gauge accurately the level and nature of prejudice and stereotyping of African Americans, especially in contemporary society, if one is to intervene effectively in these areas. However, in order to do this, society as a whole must come to terms with the fact that stereotypes and oppression still exist today. Now, I'll be the first person to talk about life in America and acknowledge that there has been enormous progress since the days of slavery and the stereotypes that I talked about that supported slavery. But it seems that too many people are unaware of the remaining stereotypes, negative attitudes, and oppression of African American people. Because these stereotypes are so often accepted as truth, defining the problem is a crucial step of intervention. It's also important to explore how stereotypes are formed and dispelled in order to intervene in the problem. Many people develop expectations based on their beliefs and are inclined to ignore or reject information that is inconsistent with these beliefs. These individuals look for information that supports stereotypes, Therefore, encouraging people to recognize information that is consistent with stereotypes may be helpful in dispelling damaging stereotypes within society. So then, it's essential to provide people with information that challenges stereotypes, because the media's portrayal of African Americans has been and still is conducive to the formation of stereotypes. Intervention is the only place to start. And currently, African Americans are overrepresented as sports figures. You know, I think that there has to be a reevaluation of the content of television commercials, social media, magazine advertisements, movies, cultural events, museum exhibits, and other media where African American representation needs to be increased. There is nothing wrong with the image of African Americans as athletes or entertainers. But it's the portrayal of these images at the exclusion of other positive images that lead to the stereotyping. Finally, educating people about damaging, inaccurate stereotypes is recommended. You know, I would even say small focus groups involving individuals of different races could be organized through agencies, schools, universities, or even religious centers. Discussion of racial stereotypes and attitudes in a safe format would allow people to explore and possibly discard these stereotypes. Individuals can reassess their own prejudice and their own bias and affect a change within themselves through a non-judgmental process of exploration. That's right. Through that type of process of exploration, the possibility that people who believe and perpetuate stereotypes do so not out of hate, but as a means of protecting themselves. That could be considered. They may do it out of ignorance, habit, fear, not because they're trying to be malicious. It has to be a time where we suspend our own disbelief and see each other as individuals rather than through the eyes of a preconceived stereotype. Because if that can be done, then we can begin a change on an individual level. And as a result, the resolution on community and social levels can happen. And until these problems are addressed, the only thing will happen is that you will continue to ignore a problem that's getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. You got to stop these clowns, man. You clown so much because you think it's funny, but it's not funny. You are helping people who hate you reinforce the image of you that they may enjoy, but you hate the image because you keep saying you a king or you a queen. So wake up and stop clowning. It's been another big episode of Big Dog Tactical. I gotta let you know that this channel right here is for big dogs only. If you want real dialogue and topics that affect the 2A community, then I invite you to become a part of the family. So, hey, feel free to subscribe. Now, listen, If you hate the channel, then I invite you to subscribe because I would love to hear your feedback, because I promise you, I am always in a day, I'm always open for constructive criticism, because you never know. You can help me improve this channel, so feel free to reach out to me. This has been Big Dog Tactical. If you want to be on Big Dog status forever, then make sure you visit BigDogTactical.com, reminding you to get your weight up and stay tactical, Big Dog. Peace.